Trump destroyed Harley Davidson. After they did this, for over a century, Harley Davidson was more than just a motorcycle brand. It was an American institution, a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and power. The roar of a Harley wasn't just the sound of an engine, it was the sound of America itself. But then something happened.
From true American icon to, you're gonna pay for this. President Trump doing a 180 on Harley Davidson this morning.
Harley Davidson is using that as an excuse, and I don't like that. And I think the people that ride Harleys are not happy with Harley Davidson, and I wouldn't be either.
Harley Davidson made a decision, a business move they believed would save the company. But in the eyes of Donald Trump, it was nothing short of a betrayal. One tweet, that's all it took. Harley Davidson should never be built in another country. Never. And just like that, an American icon became public enemy number one. The backlash was immediate. Boycotts exploded. Lifelong Harley riders walked away. Dealerships struggled, and suddenly one of the most loyal customer bases in the world turned against the brand that once defined them. Harley Davidson thought they were making a smart financial move. Instead, they walked straight into a political firestorm that crippled their business and shattered their identity. So what really happened? Why did Trump target Harley Davidson? And more importantly, can they survive this? Let's get into it. Why did Harley betray America? Harley Davidson didn't wake up one morning and decide to pick a fight with the President of the United States. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about ideology. It was about money. It all started with Trump's tariffs. In early 2018, Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum. His goal? To protect American manufacturing and bring jobs back to the U.S. But there was a problem. Harley Davidson relies heavily on steel and aluminum to build its motorcycles. And now, thanks to Trump's tariffs, the cost of producing bikes shot through the roof. And it didn't stop there. The European Union retaliated. They placed a 25% tariff on American motorcycles, making it far more expensive for Harley to sell bikes overseas.
The European Union is striking back at the United States with tariffs. This is in response to the U.S. trade tariffs on steel and aluminum. A range of American products will be affected, like motorcycles, bourbon, and jeans.
For a company that made nearly 40% of its sales outside the U.S., this was a financial disaster. Harley was now losing millions every month. They had two choices: absorb the losses and risk going bankrupt. Move some of their production overseas to avoid the tariffs and survive. They chose option 2, and that's when the war with Trump began. Trump's revenge. The boycott that shook Harley. Donald Trump is a businessman. He understands money, but he doesn't tolerate betrayal. And in Trump's mind, Harley's decision to move production overseas wasn't about survival, it was about disloyalty. He didn't see the financial numbers. He didn't see the tariff war. What he saw was a company turning its back on America. And Trump, he made sure the American people saw it that way too. Harley Davidson should never be built in another country. Never. Their employees and customers are already very angry at them. If they move, watch. It will be the beginning of the end. The tweet went viral. And just like that, Harley Davidson became public enemy number one. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Harley dealerships across the country started reporting something they had never seen before. Longtime customers walking out. Riders who had been loyal to the brand for decades now felt betrayed. The company, once a symbol of American pride, was now struggling to stay afloat. And Trump? He wasn't done yet. The CEO's worst nightmare. Harley Davidson's top executives were watching in horror as their company became a political punching bag. Their stock price was falling, dealerships were losing business, and the brand's reputation, built over 115 years, was being destroyed in real time. They tried to fight back. Harley's CEO at the time, Matt Levatich, issued a statement to clarify their decision. We are not leaving America. Motorcycles for the U.S. market will continue to be made in the U.S. But it was too late. The damage was done. Trump had spoken. And in the eyes of many Americans, Harley Davidson had abandoned its country. For Harley executives, this was a nightmare scenario. They had made a strategic business decision to survive the tariff war, but instead they had become a political lightning rod. And here's the brutal truth. No company, not even one as legendary as Harley Davidson, can survive when its own customers turn against it. Harley had faced challenges before. They had survived economic downturns, fierce competition, and changing consumer trends. But this was different. This time, they weren't just fighting financial struggles, they were fighting a war of perception. And when perception turns against you, it can destroy you faster than any financial crisis ever could. And that's exactly what was happening. Harley Davidson wasn't just losing customers, they were losing America. And the worst part? The war wasn't over. Because what Trump did next, that's what changed everything. The Trump effect, when one man can cripple a giant. Harley Davidson had been through crises before, economic downturns, supply chain struggles, foreign competition, but nothing prepared them for the storm they were about to face. Because this time, the attack wasn't coming from the outside, it was coming from the very leader of the country they called home. Trump's words weren't just tweets, they were a declaration of war. And in today's world, when the most powerful man in America takes aim at a company, the consequences are devastating. This wasn't just about PR, it was about real financial damage. Harley's stock price took an immediate hit. Investors panicked. Their brand, once a proud American staple, was suddenly toxic. But the real damage, that happened at the dealership level. It started small. Some loyal Harley riders grumbled about the company turning its back on America. But then the boycott gained momentum. People stopped walking into dealerships. Some who had planned to buy a new Harley changed their minds overnight. And then came the worst part. The riders who already owned Harleys started selling them off. On online marketplaces, thousands of Harley Davidson motorcycles started appearing, their owners desperate to distance themselves from the brand. At first, Harley Davidson's executives refused to believe what they were seeing. How could one man's tweets create such a massive shift? But then the numbers came in, and the truth was impossible to ignore. Sales were down, way down. Dealerships reported the worst numbers they had seen in years. Some locations closed their doors entirely. And Trump? He kept the pressure on. He wasn't just angry, he wanted to punish Harley Davidson. The CEO's worst nightmare comes true. Inside Harley Davidson's headquarters, panic set in. The executive team had spent years building the brand, pushing innovation, and expanding into international markets. They thought they had done everything right. Now, they were watching it all fall apart. CEO Matt Levatich tried to calm the storm. He held emergency meetings, met with analysts, and told the press that Harley was still committed to the U.S., but nothing worked. The damage was already done. Levatich realized something chilling. Harley Davidson wasn't just losing money, it was losing its identity. The company that had built its name on loyalty and American heritage was now seen as a corporate sellout. And in business, nothing kills a brand faster than losing your loyal customers. The backlash spread beyond riders. Even people who didn't own motorcycles started weighing in. Political commentators blasted Harley on television, calling them unpatriotic. Some members of Congress threatened new regulations aimed directly at them. It was an avalanche. Harley Davidson's board started asking the tough questions. How did this happen? Was there a way out? Could they reverse the damage? One thing was clear, they had to act, and fast. The desperate attempt to win back America. When a company is on the ropes, it has two choices: fight back or surrender. Harley chose to fight. They launched a massive marketing campaign aimed at rebuilding their American image. Ads flooded television, radio, and social media, emphasizing Harley's deep roots in American culture. They released a special Made in America edition motorcycle, a move designed to show their commitment to the U.S., but it didn't go as planned. Instead of excitement, the announcement was met with skepticism. People weren't convinced. They saw the move as desperate, a cheap attempt to buy back loyalty. The riders, who had already turned their backs on Harley, weren't coming back. And then Harley made an even bigger mistake. They doubled down on their global expansion strategy, investing in new overseas markets while still trying to convince Americans they were loyal to the U.S. The result? Nobody believed them. The older patriotic riders felt even more betrayed. The younger, global-minded audience didn't care about the brand enough to save it. Harley Davidson had backed itself into a corner. And the worst part, their biggest mistake was yet to come. The moment that changed everything. Harley's stock was plummeting. Dealerships were struggling. The company's leadership was running out of options. Then they made a decision so controversial, so unexpected, that it sent shockwaves through the industry. They pivoted to electric motorcycles. They called it the future of Harley Davidson. They rolled out Livewire, a fully electric, high-performance bike that was sleek, modern, and, to many longtime Harley riders, completely unacceptable. Harley had already alienated their core audience with their global expansion. Now, they were removing the very thing that made a Harley a Harley. No more thunderous V-twin engines. No more deep growling exhaust notes. Instead, a futuristic-looking machine that sounded like a household appliance. The reaction? A complete disaster. The internet erupted. Harley is dead. This isn't a Harley. It's an overpriced electric scooter. If I wanted an electric bike, I'd buy a Tesla. This is a joke. Sales collapsed even further. The live wire was a flop. Harley Davidson's attempt to win over a new generation of riders had backfired spectacularly. They had tried to be everything to everyone. Instead, they had become nothing to anyone. The death of Harley dealerships. For decades, Harley Davidson dealerships had been more than just businesses. They were gathering places, temples to the brand, where riders came to not just buy bikes, but to be part of something bigger. But now those same dealerships were empty. Customers weren't coming through the doors. Sales had fallen off a cliff. The boycotts from Trump supporters, the live wire disaster, and the constant stream of bad press had left dealers with showrooms full of bikes and no one to buy them. Then came the closures. One by one, Harley dealerships across the country shut their doors for good. Some had been in business for decades, passed down through generations. But now, the numbers didn't add up. The cost of keeping the lights on, the staff paid, the bikes on display, it was all too much when no one was buying. The stories started rolling in. Harley Davidson dealerships disappearing at an alarming rate. Once a titan, Harley Davidson now struggles to keep its dealers open. Is this the beginning of the end for Harley? The worst part? This wasn't just an economic problem anymore. This was a brand problem. Harley Davidson was no longer a must-have American icon. It was just another struggling company trying to stay alive. The biggest financial hit in Harley's history. Harley's financial report for the year came out, and the numbers were catastrophic. Sales were down across the board. The American market, the very backbone of Harley Davidson, had shrunk to historic lows. International markets, not doing much better. The European tariffs, the failure of Harley's overseas expansion, and the massive branding disaster had all taken their toll. Stock prices continued to slide downward. Investors, once confident in Harley's ability to weather any storm, started pulling out. Analysts were now openly questioning whether Harley Davidson could survive the next decade. And then, the bombshell. Harley Davidson announced it was cutting production. For a company that had once dominated the U.S. motorcycle market, this was a devastating blow. Less production meant fewer bikes on the road, fewer bikes in dealerships, and less presence in the market. Once upon a time, Harley Davidson motorcycles were symbols of excess, power, and prestige. Now, they were symbols of decline. The biggest irony? Harley Davidson had been trying for years to modernize, to appeal to younger riders, to expand into new markets. But the one move that destroyed them wasn't their outdated image. It was their attempt to change. By abandoning what made them great, they had destroyed their own appeal. And while all of this was happening, Trump was watching and waiting. Then, he made his final move. Trump's final strike. Harley Davidson was already on its knees. The boycott had done its damage. The dealerships were closing. The financials were in free fall. Then Trump took one last shot. At a rally in front of thousands of supporters, he made it clear, I told you this would happen. Harley Davidson turned their back on America, and America turned its back on them. That's what happens when you betray your own people. The crowd erupted in cheers. Trump wasn't just blaming Harley, he was burying them. This was no longer about motorcycles. This was about loyalty. Harley had lost America. And once you lose your country, your people, and your brand, there's no coming back. The media went wild. Business analysts dissected the numbers. Former Harley fans took to social media to confirm what Trump had said. The Harley they knew was gone. And in the boardrooms of Milwaukee, the executives at Harley Davidson sat in silence. They had survived wars, recessions, and market crashes, but could they survive this? Because now the biggest question of all remained unanswered. Was this the end of Harley Davidson? The desperate fight to survive. Inside Harley Davidson's headquarters, the mood was grim. The company had been battered from all sides. Trump's boycott, collapsing sales, dealership closures, the electric bike disaster. Once an unshakable American icon, Harley Davidson was now fighting for its very survival. Their leadership knew they were running out of time. The company's loyal base had abandoned them. The younger generation wasn't interested, and their international expansion had been a total failure. The boardroom meetings became desperate. How do we save Harley Davidson? They needed a plan.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
I want trade deals for our country that create more jobs and higher wages for American workers.
And I don't actually have a problem with him wanting a company to keep business in the United States. The problem for Harley Davidson is most of their business now is overseas. They're losing business here and they're gaining business in Europe.
But every option on the table looked like a losing battle. First, they considered slashing prices. Maybe if Harleys were more affordable, riders would come back, but cutting prices would destroy their already thinning profit margins. The company had relied for years on selling premium, high-priced motorcycles. Dropping prices meant they'd lose even more money. Then they debated doubling down on electric motorcycles. Maybe Livewire wasn't a total disaster. Maybe they could salvage it. But their customers had already rejected the idea, and they weren't ready to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a market that didn't want them. They thought about rebranding, distancing themselves from the political war that had consumed them. But how do you shake off a reputation when the President of the United States himself has turned you into an example of corporate betrayal? The dealers turn on Harley Davidson. Harley's dealerships had been struggling for years. First, it was the decline in sales. Then came the boycott. Then came the closing of dozens of locations across the country. But now Harley's own dealers were turning against them. In secret meetings, dealership owners discussed the unthinkable, dropping Harley Davidson entirely. Some had already started selling competitor brands. Others had gone out of business altogether. And then there were those who simply didn't see a future with Harley anymore. One dealer spoke out publicly. Harley Davidson used to be a brand we could rely on. Now it's a mess. We've lost customers, we've lost trust, and frankly, we're losing money. It's time to move on. This was the ultimate betrayal. For decades, Harley Davidson had relied on its dealerships to keep the company alive. But now, even they were abandoning ship. It was the clearest sign yet. Harley Davidson was running out of time. The last hope. Can Harley be saved? Harley Davidson's leadership had one final move to make. They announced a complete restructuring. New leadership, new models, new strategy. They wanted to go back to their roots, focus on American-made, high-quality motorcycles, and reconnect with their lost audience. They unveiled classic-style Harleys inspired by the bikes of the past. They promised a renewed focus on American manufacturing. They even hinted at revamping their lineup to appeal to younger riders while keeping their core identity intact. But was it too late? Some analysts believe so. The motorcycle industry had changed.
They're 100%. These people are the sharpest people. They're not a little bit backward. They are at the top. You know the expression, they're at the top of their game, and they use it against.
Speaking to reporters at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, Donald Trump threatened to impose as much as a 100% tariff on goods.
The younger generation had moved on. Electric bikes were taking over, and companies like Honda, Yamaha, and Ducati were dominating the market. And most importantly, Harley Davidson had lost its most valuable asset: trust. Trump's attacks, the boycott, the dealership collapse, the layoffs, the failed electric transition. It had all shaken confidence in the brand. People no longer saw Harley Davidson as a symbol of freedom and rebellion. They saw it as a struggling corporation, desperately clinging to the past. And without trust, a brand has nothing. The future of Harley Davidson. What happens now? Harley Davidson isn't dead, at least not yet, but it's a shell of what it once was. Sales are still far below their peak. The company is still struggling to attract younger riders. The dealerships are still closing, and while they've managed to stay afloat, for now, the long-term outlook isn't promising. The harsh reality? Harley Davidson is no longer the king of American motorcycles. They are no longer untouchable. And while the company may survive, it will never be the same again. This was more than a financial collapse. This was a cultural collapse. A brand isn't just a product. A brand isn't just a company. A brand is a promise. And once you break that promise, you can never rebuild it. Harley Davidson learned that the hard way, and now they may never recover. Can they rise again, or is this the end of an American icon? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives. Thanks for watching. And that's the real lesson of this story.